Chapter 17 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 17. Another bright day shining in through the small casement, and claiming fellowship with the kindred eyes of the child, awoke her. At sight of the strange room and its unaccustomed objects, she started up in alarm, wondering how she had been moved from the familiar chamber in which she seemed to have fallen asleep last night, and whither she had been conveyed. But, another glance around called to her mind all that had lately passed, and she sprung from her bed, hoping and trustful. It was yet early, and the old man being still asleep, she walked out into the churchyard, brushing the dew from the long grass with her feet, and often turning aside into places where it grew longer than in others, that she might not tread upon the graves. She felt a curious kind of pleasure in lingering among these houses of the dead, and read the inscriptions on the tombs of the good people — a great number of good people were buried there — passing on from one to another with increasing interest. It was a very quiet place, as such a place should be, save for the cawing of the rooks, who had built their nests among the branches of some tall old trees, and were calling to one another high up in the air. First, one sleek bird, hovering near his ragged house as it swung and dangled in the wind, uttered his hoarse cry, quite by chance as it would seem, and in a sober tone as though he were but talking to himself. Another answered, and he called again, but louder than before. Then another spoke, and then another, and each time the first, aggravated by contradiction, insisted on his case more strongly. Other voices, silent till now, struck in from boughs lower down, and higher up, and midway, and to the right and left, and from the tree-tops, and others, arriving hastily from the grey church turrets and old belfry window, joined the clamour, which rose and fell, and swelled and dropped again, and still went on. And all this noisy contention, amidst a skimming to and fro, and lighting on fresh branches, and frequent change of place, which satirized the old restlessness of those who lay so still beneath the moss and turf below, and the strife in which they had worn away their lives. Frequently raising her eyes to the trees whence these sounds came down, and feeling as though they made the place more quiet than perfect silence would have done, the child loitered from grave to grave, now stopping to replace with careful hands the bramble which had started from some green mound it helped to keep in shape, and now peeping through one of the low latticed windows into the church, with its worm-eaten books upon the desks, and bays of whitened green mouldering from the pew sides, and leaving the naked wood to view. There were the seats where the poor old people sat, worn spare and yellow like themselves, the rugged font where children had their names, the homely altar where they knelt in after life, the plain black trestles that bore their weight on their last visit to the cool old shady church. Everything told of long use and quiet slow decay. The very bell rope in the porch was frayed into a fringe, and hoary with old age. She was looking at a humble stone which told of a young man who had died at 23 years old, 55 years ago, when she heard a faltering step approaching, and looking round saw a feeble woman bent with the weight of years, who tottered to the foot of that same grave and asked her to read the writing on the stone. The old woman thanked her when she had done, saying that she had had the words by heart for many a long, long year, but could not see them now. 'Were you his mother?' said the child. 'I was his wife, my dear.' She the wife of a young man of 23? Ah, true, it was 55 years ago. 'You wonder to hear me say that?' remarked the old woman, shaking her head. 'You're not the first. Older folk than you have wondered at the same thing before now. Yes, I was his wife. Death doesn't change us more than life, my dear.' 'Do you come here often?' asked the child. 'I sit here very often in the summer time. she answered. "I used to come here once to cry and mourn, but that was a weary while ago, bless God. I pluck the daisies as they grow, and take them home," said the old woman, after a short silence. "I like no flowers so well as these, and haven't for 55 years. It's a long time, and I'm getting very old." Then, growing garrulous upon a theme which was new to one listener, though it were but a child, she told her how she had wept and moaned and prayed to die herself when this happened, and how when she first came to that place, a young creature strong in love and grief, she had hoped that her heart was breaking, as it seemed to be. But that time passed by, and although she continued to be sad when she came there, still she could bear to come, and so went on until it was pain no longer, but a solemn pleasure, and a duty she had learned to like. And now that 55 years were gone, she spoke of the dead man as if he had been her son or grandson, with a kind of pity for his youth, growing out of her own old age, and an exalting of his strength and manly beauty, as compared with her own weakness and decay. And yet she spoke about him as her husband too, and thinking of herself in connection with him, as she used to be, and not as she was now, talked of their meeting in another world, as if he were dead but yesterday, and she, separated from her former self, were thinking of the happiness of that comely girl who seemed to have died with him. The child left her gathering the flowers that grew upon the grave, and thoughtfully retraced her steps. The old man was by this time up and dressed. Mr Codlin, still doomed to contemplate the harsh realities of existence, was packing among his linen the candle ends which had been saved from the previous night's performance, while his companion received the compliments of all the loungers in the stable yard, who, unable to separate him from the master mind of Punch, set him down as next in importance to that merry outlaw, and loved him scarcely less. When he had sufficiently acknowledged his popularity, he came in to breakfast, at which meal they all sat down together. "And where are you going to-day?" said the little man, addressing himself to Nell.
"Indeed, I hardly know. We have not determined yet,"
replied the child.
"We're going on to the races," said the little man. "If that's your way, and you like to have us for company, let us travel together. If you prefer going alone, only say the word, and you'll find that we shan't trouble you."
"We'll go with you," said the old man. "Nell, with them, with them."
The child considered for a moment, and reflecting that she must shortly beg, and could scarcely hope to do so at a better place than where crowds of rich ladies and gentlemen were assembled together for purposes of enjoyment and festivity, determined to accompany these men so far. She therefore thanked the little man for his offer, and said, glancing timidly towards his friend, that if there was no objection to their accompanying them as far as the race town—
"Objection?" said the little man. "Now be gracious for once, Tommy, and say that you'd rather they went with us. I know you would. Be gracious, Tommy."
"Trotters,"
said Mr Codlin, who talked very slowly and ate very greedily, as is not uncommon with philosophers and misanthropes,
"you're too free." "Why, what harm can it do?" urged the other. "No harm at all in this particular case, perhaps," replied Mr Codlin, "but the principle's a dangerous one, and you're too free, I tell you."
"Well, are they to go with us or not?"
"Yes, they are," said Mr Codlin, "but you might have made a favour of it, mightn't you?"
The real name of the little man was Harris, but it had gradually merged into the less euphonious one of Trotters, which, with the prefatory adjective, short, had been conferred upon him by reason of the small size of his legs. Short Trotters, however, being a compound name, inconvenient of use in friendly dialogue, the gentleman on whom it had been bestowed was known among his intimates either as Short or Trotters, and was seldom accosted at full length as Short Trotters, except in formal conversations and on occasions of ceremony. Short then, or Trotters, as the reader pleases, returned unto the remonstrance of his friend Mr Thomas Codlin,